Just very quickly, a word of thanks to our sponsors, Julius Baer. We're really delighted that you've decided to align with Mumbai Gallery Weekend. The perfect combination of art and finance, which is Mumbai. And to also say that this space we're in, the Ice Factory Ballad Estate, is almost a brand new space, a cultural center. The last talk that we had was on the lawns of the museum, but it's wonderful now that we have a venue in Ballad Estate for such events. And to welcome our speakers, I'll start with Stephanie Rosenthal. Most recently, Stephanie was a director of the Martin Gropius Bau in Berlin. And before that, she was for several years with the Hayward Gallery in London. And now, just 3 months ago, she's moved to Abu Dhabi to take over as director of Abu Dhabi Guggenheim project. So it's a project because it's still in the making. We're delighted that you've taken the time out from your very, very busy schedule to be here. And Durjoy Rahman. I first heard of Durjoy when I was in Amsterdam at the Rijksacademy, and somebody said, you know, there is a gentleman from South Asia who was here, and he supports a lot of our residents and so on. And that's the first time I heard your name, Durjoy. With his art foundation in Bangladesh, he supports a lot of projects internationally and also has been quietly collecting art for many, many years. So welcome, Durjoy. Thank you for coming. And our own Mortimer Chatterjee, who is one half of Chatterjee and Lal Art Gallery, and he's actually one of the founding members of Mumbai Gallery Weekend, which started 11 years ago. Most recently, I mean, many things that Mortimer does. He's also looking after the art collection of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. But most recently, he has published a very impressive 2-volume book called Moving Focus. And it's about modern and contemporary art in India with almost 60 artists covered in it, a very impressive volume. I will now hand over to you, Mort, to take it forward.
Thank you so much, Ranjana. I really appreciate that introduction. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon at the Ice Factory as part of Mumbai Gallery Weekend 2023. It's fantastic that there are so many events ongoing this weekend. And I think that it's probably the busiest we've had till date over the last 10 years. It's really a great comeback after the pandemic years, and it's wonderful that everyone's been able to come, including guests now from not only outside Bombay, but outside India. And so therefore, it's wonderful to be able to welcome Stephanie and Durjoy to Bombay for this weekend. For the flow of today's session, Show and Tell, I propose that I speak first with Stephanie and then to Durjoy, and just let them take us through their journey, professional journeys and journeys with art. Just to preface why the title Show and Tell, I certainly have been interested for some time in the South Asian context as to how non-institutional, especially private foundations and private collections, are becoming incredibly important nodes for the ways in which modern and contemporary art are disseminated to audiences. In the absence of museums in our region, it becomes incredibly important for private collections to then become, in a sense, our repositories for art. As Ranjana mentioned, I was lucky enough to work on a book recently, and in that book, we invited a number of scholars, artists, and art critics to reflect upon artworks made in South Asia over the last 120 years, which moved them in some manner. And what was extraordinary was to see the number of works from which they chose, which are simply not available to see because they are in private collections. So in a sense, the title Show and Tell is a little bit of a provocation as to the ways in which art now needs to perhaps come out of storage, off private homes, the walls of private homes, and into larger circulation. In that sense, I feel that both Stephanie and Durjoy are incredibly important activators for this move, as it were, especially in the present moment. And both represent something about the future, which I think I'd like to address during our conversation. Enough from me for the time being. Stephanie, I'd love to first just ask you to perhaps take us through a little bit of your journey, your professional journey. And we had spoken before that perhaps we could look at some slides which would enable us to do that. And in fact, some slides of buildings which you have been associated with over the years. So I'm going to power up the PowerPoint. And let's see.
Well, thank you very much for your kind words and also for your invitation. It's, as you probably have realized, every opportunity to come to India is good. So I'm very happy that I can come and that I can see some amazing exhibitions here. And it's also always nice to have these opportunities to actually reflect on one's own journey. And so what I'm doing now is actually taking you on the journey I'm at the moment, because of course, you can imagine if I would talk about my curatorial practice, it would be very much related to performance art, to kind of process, to participation. That is the field I worked in a lot. I started at the Gropius, at the Haus der Kunst in Munich, the Hayward Gallery. But what I'm doing right now in endeavoring just only since a few months to work for and with and creating the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is very much, of course, thinking about what is this actually, this building, how do we engage with it, where are we? And so I went a bit back in my own history and
Shall I?
Yes, maybe you do it and then I'll. It's just thinking that many of the places I worked at and for were very bespoke architectures, and that for me, it's always been a dance with the building, and the fact that for me the space you work with is really essential, and it informs what you do and how the artists think about something. And of course, the Haus der Kunst in Munich, which was built for and actually initiated by Adolf Hitler, had a very, very strong history. So, and I worked there for 10 years, and it was like the whole time it was a lot about not, of course, talking all the time about the German history, but it was very informed about thinking how can you break this fascist architecture and what's the opportunity of art, and creating these places for audiences to come and continue that journey, right? Instead of saying we get stuck in that time in the 30s, but just kind of continue. And when I moved on and became the chief curator of the Hayward Gallery, again, I stayed 10 years. In between, I went to Australia for the Biennale for good over a year, but this brutalistic architecture, again, was a completely different building, right? You were like in it, and the artists we worked with were very much, it was much more introvert, because the building has this, you know, downstairs where you can't look out, and then you walked up. So a lot of these, I think, is what I'm doing right now, thinking what is it if you work in a new building. And the Gropiusbau in Berlin was a joy, because it's this kind of 19th century building, a bit of a look-alike Renaissance palace. And I remember walking into the building for the first time thinking, God, it feels a bit like a bank. Yeah. And what do we do now? And I think that was also the first time where I thought, oh, my work was performance and dance, and thinking about that art is really something which, of course, talks to your brain, but very much talks to your body. And I believe that the transformation we experience is very much how we engage with our full body with it. And that if you create an institution that it's nearly like this, the framework you build is extremely important for allowing a critical thinking and engaging with the content you see. So I feel of course, the key is the exhibition or the artist you work with, but I think if you have to, or we at least at the Gropiusbau spend a lot of time to think about how do we allow actually our visitors to continue to think about the work when they go out of this exhibition. Because for me, what we're doing in our world only works if it goes beyond the door of our institution. Like I think the change happens in the conversation we have afterwards, or the click we have in the head when we think about the things we've seen. So a lot of that, I think, happens in these spaces where you sit together, the cafe or the bookshop. So when you come to the opening of the Guggenheim in 2026 and you think, oh no, so she didn't manage to move the museum shop from the exit, then I didn't succeed. But I'm very much someone who thinks it's really wrong to make people go to a shop after you've seen a show, because I do think it's not so important to spend whatever the research says of your $7. It's really you divert people's minds if you don't allow them to stay with the content they've just seen. So this is a lot what I'm thinking about right now when we think about what is an institution and what is the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. And here being so close actually to that place, that the collection is built since many, many years, and many amazing curators have worked on the collection of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. And I was very impressed and happy to see that a good collection cannot be built in 2-3 years. And I know a lot of museums try to do that, but it's not. You're not able. You have to be able to look and learn from what you've bought and continue. So it's actually for me a joy and something which I felt was very reassuring to know that the collection is actually something which is growing since a while. And of course, we'll look at it now together with also, and I want to mention this here because what I like about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is also it's not just the Guggenheim and myself representing the Guggenheim going and doing an institution there. It's really a partnership with the Department of Culture and Tourism, DCT. And Mesa Al-Qasimi is basically my counterpart who's doing the project with me and also bringing that perspective to the project I could never have. So I think it's a really interesting joint adventure to say we're creating this together. And it's also with the collection that our teams, these different perspectives from different parts of the world, are coming together to creating an institution in a place which I think is really giving a unique opportunity for creating a new perspective on what how we perceive art history, and really kind of I'm discussing with colleagues, do we say adding to the canon or actually saying changing the canon? I'd like to change it, but I think a more modest way would probably be to say we're adding to the canon. And so you see here the massive building we're creating, and the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, which is the architect Frank Gehry, who works on the building actually since 2007 when the government in Abu Dhabi decided to create that institution, is actually part of a whole cultural district. And when you go to the next image, you'll see the Guggenheim has this very exposed place outside, so it's pushed into the sea, is very much kind of therefore I think exposed to the elements. But you have all the other buildings next to us, which are kind of getting developed from the Louvre Abu Dhabi, which exists already since a few years, but the Abrahamic family house, which I think is an amazing project. But all the other buildings like the Sheikh Zayed National Museum, who are coming up right now, Team Lab is building a museum. So it's a kind of basically a huge endeavor of bringing these different institutions together and also collecting. The next one is just a quick overview of how like the gallery and how large the institution will be. And if you go on to Edouard Glissant, who is an inspiration, a philosopher for Martinique, and he's a big inspiration for many, many artists, Edouard Glissant, and I think his thinking is being present in the art world latest since the 90s. And I've always was inspired by him, but now endeavoring on this project to think what an institution should allow in a place like Abu Dhabi, and that kind of very, even if we don't want to talk about, you know, that there is a center, of course there is no center, but at least it shifts away from the West being the center and going somewhere where, you know, we'll know that it's really interesting to think what story do we want to tell in Abu Dhabi. And of course, being here in Mumbai, in India, also to realize that there is so much new perspectives to bring into a collection narrative when you're in a place like Abu Dhabi. And so I feel Glissant for us is at the moment a real inspiration in just thinking, what can that institution bring if we work with artists and build narratives, and also creating an institution which will allow a generation for the first time to grow up with contemporary art and to kind of see work. And I mean, that for me is a real, was for me a real driving force to say I want to move there and do that, to just think, God, yeah, 5-year-old is in 15 years, you can say, yeah, I've kind of walked to this museum and that has really enriched my thinking of what the world is. And so it is a real, I think, important place. And of course, you know, having worked so much in the last years in the West, I mean, we would not really put one stone on another to build a museum, right? I mean, we all say we don't need another museum. But I feel, I'm convinced that doing it in Abu Dhabi will really be a game changer in the discourse we're having, in allowing a generation who has access there to see works and be part of this discourse and rewrite the history. So I feel it is a very important endeavor. And so for Glissant with his the idea of the archipelago, to say the one is composed of many different islands, and, you know, to so early on saying that the difference is what unifies us. It's not about unifying, you know, there is not one right or wrong. And having lived in so many different parts of the world, I've also learned there is just not the one way, you know. It's not wrong to kind of focus on art history, you know, where we maybe say the pop art in New York is really important, but it doesn't, it's just a little island of that. So we really see the institution as an institution which can bring all these different perspectives together. And I feel being in this place and having the diversity in the population there already really allows that there is not a dominant, you know, group of people. So for that's so we're working a lot with this idea of Glissant, and I think now there may be two more, or is it, do you want to interrupt quickly?
Well, something which comes to mind immediately is that we're talking, or you're talking a lot about the idea of the future. What is going to happen? You're subverting, expanding the canon, creating the conditions by which you are almost pushing against some of the norms. In a sense, you are talking about something which will be we're still another 3-4 years out. We're talking about an audience that is yet to exist, as it were. And I was reminded of the early museum director, Alfred Barr, and when he was building MoMA's collection in the 1920s, he used the analogy of a comet that's through space. And he sort of said that an acquisitions collection of MoMA's is something like a comet insofar as it's collecting in the present, its head is in the present, but its tail is in the ever-receding past. And in that sense, how does one future-proof oneself through collecting now for an audience that we are going to present to in the future? Is that something that is on your mind, or do you, in a sense, feel that where we are today is pretty much where we're going to be 3-4 years hence? Because it seems to me that we're in such a dynamic, the world, as we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years, has changed so fundamentally in many ways, that there seems to be these kind of paradigm shifts that we're engaged with at a societal level, and therefore also the engagement of artists in work.
I mean, I think I'm a generation where I'm already, you know, have to painfully realize that I don't understand many things. It's just, you know, I'm only, you know, 50 and still feel there's a generation coming up who perceives and is able to perceive reality so differently that I wouldn't be even able to speak for them. And therefore, I feel what we're trying to do is just give this responsibility also to the audience and say, you know, we want you and the people who live there really feel this is our museum. You know, it's not an institution where we say this is just for people flying in and out. And I think as long as you create, or at least try to create, a place where you have a sense of belonging from the people who live there and the generations who grow up with this, they will help you to realize, and you know, in this institution, we want people, our audience, to also have the chance to be part of what that institution has to be. Because I think luckily we're now in a time where we know it would be absurd to think that two people would know, you know, how you even make a successful museum. For me, a museum is a place of, you know, of getting into relation, of having conversations, and these conversations will be led from very different perspectives. And so I think that's the future for me, that we allow that in institutions.
In the mission statement on the website, I think South Asia is actually mentioned as part of the core collecting activities for the museum. And in fact, that because of our close proximity, I would assume our audience, our South Asian audience, is in your mind also as kind of an expanded neighborly audience for what will be coming up at the museum. Is that a fair statement to make?
I mean, of course, we hope you all come all the time to Abu Dhabi from here. But we also know that a lot of people from South Asia live in the region. I mean, we'll all know, I mean, the percentages are so high, so that it's definitely, and if you look at the collection, and you all know that as well as me, that there is, of course, a high percentage of South Asian artists, and we feel that we are definitely a place for here and for artists to, you know, be part of a discourse and be part of the narrative we are constructing.
Yeah. There are lots of questions that I want to ask about canon formation, but I think I'm going to wait till after we've spoken with Durjoy, and then maybe all three of us can talk about that, because I think that also concerns how Durjoy is approaching DBF. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for the time being.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you. When I got an email from Ranjana that I will be speaking for a talk, initially I was very nervous. Then, well, thank you, Ranjana and Mott, to think of me and consider me for this important session.
Well, Durjoy, thank you so much for being part of this afternoon. I'm going to ask you my first question, which is really to do with your own journey as a collector. Before perhaps as we know you better, perhaps as a philanthropist and supporting exhibitions around the world, maybe you could just take us through how you began your collection, what the collection is primarily focused on, and then we can perhaps move on.
Well, my collection journey started very unexpectedly. From the earliest stage, I was a very big fan of cartoons and graphics and pop art. So initially, my collection was based on a cartoonist and the master of Bangladesh, one of the master artists of Bangladesh, Rafiqun Nobi. So I started collecting their cartoons. And then for the professional reasons, when I used to travel to New York and London, I used to see a lot of graphics and pop art in many galleries. And that also kind of fascinated me. So these are the things that I thought that also inspired me. Then my personal life, 25 years ago when I got married, I got a gift from a very important painter, Somojit Roy. He's a local painter. He just passed away last year. He's the wedding gift. So these incidents, and thought that, okay, I would try to build something. So never thought it's going to transform into a major art collection, which is now. Then, because of...
Can I just ask you, at that point in time, what about the gallery scene in Dhaka? Is there an active gallery scene from which you can acquire works, or at that time were your acquisitions mainly directly from artists?
It's a very interesting question, Mort, because Dhaka is the capital city, but Bangladesh art scene actually was not so promising or thriving at that time, 25 plus years ago. And the galleries were at the time very limited. I took the advantage of that limited number of galleries because my work place was kind of very near to the gallery area at that time called Dhanmondi. There were only a handful of galleries, 2 or 3. So during the off time, I could hop into this limited number of galleries and see the artworks. So that kind of course, influenced me. With the Dhaka traffic, probably I wouldn't be explored so much, but those days I used to hop in many galleries, the few galleries that was existing at the time. So, and as of today, I don't think the gallery scene really improved a lot in Dhaka, but it is changing. There are many obstructions and limitations that we have as a city possess, because it's a small, Dhaka city is a small city, 18 million people lives, and then the real estate is very expensive. It's not the opportunity, it's the limitations that the city brings. So then I started collecting those pop art graphics. And then on the other hand, I started seeing that young artists from our region, our country, kind of deviated from graphics and the printmaking. So I tried to kind of activate them that being an artist is not that they should only be working on canvases or watercolors. So 2009, I hosted a modern print and a contemporary graphics exhibition with my collection. So, and I tried to show people, because we had a very big misconception at the time, and I would blame the artist community also. Sometimes they used to say to the collectors, okay, you cannot afford this, my work, so why don't you take a print? No, that is not a right. Print is also considered as a respectable art and should not be considered as one medium that is a kind of considered as a more lower than the other media like canvases and or watercolors. So we did in 2009 we did a show exhibition called.
Is this the show?
Yes, that's the show in 2009. I did from my personal collection, and that kind of created a lot of buzz. A lot of people got interested in the prints, and then 2014. So this collection journey, as just Stephanie has said, that a lot of works people are collecting, but it becomes confined into their either homes or storage or somewhere in the workplace, which the general population or the majority of the art enthusiasts are unable to view. Or probably they have seen the works in the magazines or some art books, but they are not able to access, because seeing is believing. So you don't see, when you see an artwork, then you get activated. So then in 2014, I was invited by a major art gallery in Bangladesh. That is probably the oldest art gallery so far, which exists, called Bengal Gallery. So they invited me to do a private collection exhibition, and that, I believe, was the first time a collector was invited in a public space to exhibit their private collection. At the first go, I was a little hesitant, but I thought that, well, I start the journey, let others come by and start. Yeah. So that was also a very well-covered and important exhibition that inspired many of the collectors to exhibit their works in an alternative ways, then these makes me feel that I've been collecting. Then what's the next thing?
And around when was this? When did you make this kind of transition to a more global philanthropic?
So back in 2018, I formally launched Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation, but I was right after my exhibition in 2014, I started realizing that what is next? What I'm going to do, I cannot just keep on doing the same thing, showing some people inviting them in a public gallery, showing them my artwork. So that thought was kind of instigating me to launch a platform, which is Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation. And I'm glad that two of the guests from this audience was present in 2019 when I launched our Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation officially in Hong Kong during the Art Basel. So two of them are here, and I'm glad that we still in that journey, and we're discussing those challenges, what as a DBF we faced in the earliest stage of the foundation.
Yeah, and when you look at exhibitions that you want to support at this point in time, given the fact that DBF is now known globally, do you go out and actively look at opportunities, or do you find that now people are coming and museums and institutions are coming to you? How does it work at this point?
Mort, I wouldn't say this as an opportunity. I think it's a scope and the alignment.
Yeah.
So when this and when I founded this Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation, Durjoy Bangladesh, though my name has relevance with Durjoy, but Durjoy means invincible. So Durjoy Bangladesh is invincible Bangladesh. So when I founded this Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation in 2018, and that was the time I told to many people that I do not want a foundation like any other foundation that it pops out every 6 months or so. Everybody has an art foundation because they find it fancy to be a founder of a foundation or founder of some art initiative. I wanted it to be a very active and engaging platform. So that probably I have been able to prove, and our team has been able to prove to our other stakeholder in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So there is I would say, conversation and alignment and collaboration request that has come from different side. I would say it's more of a welcoming and appreciation of what we have done.
And what I like a lot is that obviously I think you value the idea of being nimble in the sense of that because you don't have one set space, you can kind of create your own trans-global activity program that allows you to kind of be in the UK one day, you can be, I think in India you've been active as well, in North America. So it gives you that almost nomadic nimbleness, which I think is very much a testament of the kind of world that we all live in, especially now that we're going back to some sense of normality. Can I just ask you to maybe speak about, are these images from the homelands?
Yes. This is the first images from the homeland, both the images from the
maybe
homeland.
You could just talk about the importance of the homeland.
In 2018, I was invited in Kettleyard, in the Cambridge University, to collaborate with them in the public program. So they had a one-day homeland symposium. But I thought that, okay, it's a one-day symposium or one-day conference. What does it mean for us? It could be just probably getting a collaboration or some branding identity. But then I spoke to the curator and the artist. So the particular work that you see on the other side, that's Iftekhar Dadi's this neon light series that called Shapla. So this series is actually, we've kind of funded to be produced for the first time in UK. And it became so successful, and the way it has been produced, this neon has been produced in that facility in UK, and Iftikhar is still continuing with that production in UK. And we were I would say, I'm very content that we helped Iftikhar Dadi and Elizabeth Dadi to produce it for this show. And this particular, well, a lot of people ask me that, okay, what instigates you to collaborate? And what's your journey? So when I saw this project, so this is a flower called Shapla. Shapla is Bangladesh national flower. And I asked artists, at that time I just knew Iftikhar, I come to know. Then he said that he has he took this inspiration of a Shapla sculpture from the central bank of downtown of Bangladesh. So I kind of see our relevance and the relationship with this artwork. Well, it is right now with DBF collection. And then the other work is Zarina Hashmi's The Boat about Rohingya, carrying the Rohingya refugees. So she's trying to portray at the time, you see the heartbeats on the boat. So that was kind of, she has used these heartbeats in earlier series. But when the Rohingya crisis happened, I took a lot of initiative because at the time, it's not only, I thought that it's not only a political statement and a political issue, but also it's a big humanitarian issue. So a lot of people kind of avoiding this problem. So anything with Rohingya, I try to promote because it is a big crisis, humanitarian crisis. And this work of Zarina Hashmi, when was loaned from my collection for the exhibition, which at the time belonged to the gallery, but we already acquired it. So these are the very important, this is one of Zarina's very important work from her career.
Durjoy, when we were speaking earlier, you had, I was just thinking when we saw the boat, you were telling me about a residency that you've been hosting, which is it called the Maji Residence? And you were telling me that that means boatman. And we were just talking about this idea of DBF becoming some kind of bridge. And you used a very lovely, I thought, analogy there of the idea of the boatman and how DBF itself sees itself as some sort of crossing between cultures.
So, you know, just as I would answer, I would take this answering this, you know, I was looking at this coaster on this table. So it says stirred with obsession. So probably I was obsessed with many things that, okay, what is next? So what is next was always my obsession. So we founded Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation. We started collaborating with a lot of major institutions. We started loaning artworks. This particular artwork, just before I moved to Maji, this particular artwork is artist from Ghana, Serge Cloty, and it is donated from my collection to Arnhem Museum back in 2019. The Arnhem is the space which hosts Schönbeck Festival. And when I saw this work, immediately I knew that this is a work that relates us, because all this tapestry, these blocks, are made from the yellow jerry cans. And as of today, in a very densely populated of Dhaka city, still there are jerry cans people carry, but in a white color, a transparent white color, to carry and reserve the water. Because it doesn't have all the water supplies that requires 24 hours they need. And these artist has taken this, that is a cooking oil. So he took those jerry cans and cut them in pieces with the help of their community and made this artwork. So when I was introduced with this artwork from the gallery in Berlin, because that is also that when I found Durjoy Bangladesh Foundation, I registered it in Berlin just to try to give it a more of a cross-border identity that our Asian organization or Asian institution or a South Asian institution doesn't need to be only start the journey from Asia itself. It can start its journey. So at that time, with that journey, I was started this Majhi residency. So Majhi means boatman, and I thought that it could make a bridge between the artist from Asia with an artist from Europe. So the first residency we started in 2019 in Venice, inviting the artists from South Asia, from Bangladesh, and from other countries who are Bangladeshi diaspora artists. Some of them are living in Italy at the time, and also the Venetian artists. So this gives an identity, and I would say a collaboration between the art practitioners. So they could exchange their ideas, know what they are doing. And I thought that what is our mission? Everybody's mission is to express ourselves. So I thought that, well, artists from this region can go there and show the artists from that community that what they are capable of, what is their strength, or what they believe. So based on that, I started this residency project.
Yeah. I'm going to just move on a couple of slides.
Yes.
And really, I'd love you just to talk a little bit just about where you see now the future of DBF going in the next couple of years, given the fact that you've told us that you're so interested in creating these bridges. I think when we spoke earlier, I was struck by the residencies that you were also involved with at the Rijksacademie, and we talked about education a little bit. Maybe if you could talk to us about those ideas that you have in your mind, and then I'd love to get Stephanie involved in the conversation.
Thank you, Mort. So, Mort, the future of DBF, or future of art practices from Bangladesh, I think, lies with establishing the past. Means when after Second World War, the U.S. and the North American and the Western institutions has really solidified their practices and showed the academics and others how their art movements are. But what is our voice? We had a long 1,000-year-old history. We had such a strong heritage, but we have never been established our identity because there was no one that could probably express or establish our past to them. So I think the DBF future lies to solidify our past, our strength, our heritage, and our pride, and kind of also align with what is happening in the contemporary or the current ecosystem, so that way we could make a holistic approach. And with doing that, we worked with institutions like Rijksacademie. We were started working with Savvy Contemporary. We worked with Al Circle Foundation. So our initiatives are based, the prime condition is that it has to be South Asia centric. None of the organizations that we worked so far, they are international organizations, but whenever there is an invitation, we are very pleased, very honored. But our first criteria is it has to be South Asian centric. Based on that, you see Rijksacademie, which when we introduced this residency program, which we supported their fellowship, which Ranjana just said, we immediately said that our funding will only be used for the South Asian emerging artists. We started working with with Kochi Biennial, and that award that will be given to an emerging South Asian artist, and the awardee will get a space in Hayward Gallery to showcase the Henny Art Space to showcase their work, again a South Asian centric, which I think is a opportunity and a new way of decolonialization, that how an emerging artist from South Asia is getting a space in an important space in UK. So that's
fantastic, Durjoy. And thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I think that I'm ripping this cord out. But I'd immediately like to follow up on that point that you made about decolonization, and maybe move back to Stephanie, and when you were talking about canon formation and how you saw your role within Guggenheim Abu Dhabi in a sense to push back, to expand notions of canon formation. It's something that you and I also spoke about earlier in the afternoon, just when we were looking at some art together, when we also talked about the fact that, and Glisson, of course, speaks to this as well, this idea of homogenization versus some idea of actually celebrating our differences. And one necessary outcome, surely, of this increasingly expanded art world that we exist in is that there is often misunderstanding because of cultural specificities. And perhaps that's something that we shouldn't necessarily think is a bad thing, but we should actually understand that sometimes difference should be celebrated, as Glisson would say. So I'd love to know, in your role now in Abu Dhabi, how one, in a sense, balances the desire to reach out to a larger international audience, whilst, of course, realizing that we all live within our own specificities culturally, and that goes for artists, of course, as well.
I'll answer that immediately, just because I think what really brings us both together, I feel this artist residencies is such an important, how would you say, structure for, I think, also that how private foundations and public institutions can live together. Because I feel this inviting artists and having as a public institution support by a foundation to invite artists to work with a public institution is something enormously valuable. And when I started at the Gropiusbau, the first thing I did was really initiating this artist residency, and like now we've just started with Pallavi Powell to come to the Gropiusbau. But it's always the problem of where's the funding, because I think it's true if you have, and very often, as you say, artists from certain parts of the world don't get the funding, but then you have very often, of course, artists who, you know, it's very easy to invite them for residency. So I think it's so important to do that, and that's something we, you know, at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, we really want to embed in also the DNA of the institution, to say we want to invite artists to participate and think with us. And I think that leads to the question you're having now, this kind of celebrating differences. I think artists, you know, they're not afraid of talking about the differences. You know, it's not about evening things out. It's just about also presenting your own view of something. And I feel, for me, the Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi is really a unique opportunity to, from the beginning on, just have these different perspectives, because it's also just a part of the world where so many, you know, the audience already will be from so many different parts of the world, because the population there, you know, who, you know, the let's say 10% Emiratis, they will be 10% of our audience, but you'll have automatically so many people from South Asia, from North Africa, from West. I mean, this is our, you know, our audience is that already. We don't have to. And I think the radiating out to an international audience, for us, I feel the importance right now is to have a local audience, because I really believe that an institution breezes through the fact that you have an audience who comes back and feels part of it. We're not a display for an international audience. I think we are relevant for an international audience and discourse if we have the conversation where we are with people, so that it is a really living organism. And I think that leads to what you're saying. You are the future if you engage with the people who actually, you know, living it. And so I think it's a very important part, what I think is a shift public institutions have made, to really say we are a living organism. We can't pretend we know. It's like we can help to create platforms to learn and to engage. And I think that's, you know, where I feel artists are the people we have to learn from,
Right.
and give them the opportunity. And I think therefore the things you are doing to help artists to be and also be part of, I think, international institutions is crucial to change the canon, no?
Absolutely right. And one thing I was struck when Durjoy was speaking, as opposed to when we heard earlier about your very embodied relationship with buildings in which you have been so involved over the years. The reality is we've obviously lived over the last 2 years without being able to visit museums at all. And the increasing proliferation of the online space as a way to engage with art, in a sense, presents us with challenges and with opportunities. How do you think through this expanded nature of what a museum could be? As you said, you want the experience to live on beyond exiting from the building door. Now that we have these wonderful tools, is it something that you are deeply engaged with in terms of the digital space and how it can feed into activities which happen within the building? And I'm sure this is something that's happened prior to pandemic with your experience at Gropius Bau as well. Maybe you'd like to speak a little bit to that?
Well, I do think that, at least in Germany, the pandemic was, helped us to accelerate in what everybody says, going digital. And that was a hugely important step, I think, for many public institutions, because we had no funding and no one had really an interest of doing that. And all the thinking of how can we be relevant for people who may be not able to come, it can be someone who's in the city but can't move. Is I think now the way how we think of saying we'll have to create a digital space which at the same time is as unique as the physical space. So I don't believe it's just about telling what you're doing in the physical space. It's really creating an experience you can only have in the digital space, so that it doesn't become this, this is what you could see if you come. Because I still believe that the shows we're doing in a building, they're very, I believe in this experience you have through your body, and you can't replace that. But we know there are many things you can only do in the digital realm. So I think it's nearly that public institutions have to also recognize that this is a different expertise. You can't just kind of copy and paste into, of course you can do it with talks, and it's better to have a digital walkthrough than no walkthrough, but I think we'll have to go beyond that in how we engage our audience on that platform.
Durjoy, I'd love you to maybe also chip in here as well, and your own experience with using digital platforms to promote DBF.
Well, definitely we use digital platforms to promote our activities. During the high peak time of COVID, we used Ocula to promote a project that we did at that time. The different artists were stuck at different places. So we did a project called Future of Hope. At that time, the hope word was not so actively used, but then eventually, but we did a project and we launched it through Ocula and Artsy, that exhibition. But being said that, I am kind of a skeptical about promoting art or creativity extensively in the digital platform, because I think it undermines people who has physical space or who has worked digitally. If you are very creative, you could really take the lead and really can, I would say, that kind of take the lead than the person who is genuine, or probably the person who is investing a lot of money in their physical space or physical work. So I personally feel that there should be some kind of advantage given to the people who are doing physical work or actual presence or in-person experience. There should be a priority given. But well, in this way, we are kind of live in a wave series. Everything is captured with fishnet. So we are living in stuck in a net world, and that is important digitally to expose things. But how it's going to be impacting and how it's going to be related with the future art practices, that is, I think, our next decade will decide. I am just an art enthusiast, have a platform, but it is to be decided by the audience. They are the power. As Stephanie has just said, local people. People is the power. People has to decide, or local people has to decide, or that, okay, which they should give the priority. If they want a digital space to come into the forefront, that will be the next game we should have to wait for.
Yeah.
But I do think, I mean, of course, the digital space is also a form of inclusiveness. No, I mean, you allow, so I do think we'll have to make a difference between documenting everything we're doing in a physical space, which we all know changes, because many, very often one has the feeling then, oh, this is only happening to document it. And I think there is a different energy, but I think we are at a time now where we can create things which are specifically for people who are not able to come for physical or financial reasons. And I think that's extremely important to kind of distribute the knowledge also beyond the, very often we are the privileged who can travel. Of course, you have always local people, but I feel we have overcome this, that the digital is just the representing of a physical. It is a creative art form on many levels, and I do feel that has to be acknowledged, which means you need funding, you need resources, you need people who do that parallel to what you do in the institutions, and that will, I think, really allow a more inclusive discourse.
So, yeah, and also generationally, I think there's a whole generation of people who are far more comfortable digesting work for whatever reason online rather than in the physical spaces, and whether that's in the intimidation factor, certainly from the private commercial gallery sphere. We know that sometimes it is hard for young people to make that leap of pressing the buzzer of a closed door which doesn't just open. I mean, that is, and so therefore perhaps digesting a show on Instagram becomes an easier, I don't know. But as Durjoy said, it's up to the audience to decide, and I think now's our time to maybe hand over the conversation to our audience here. If there are questions perhaps for Durjoy or Stephanie, I think now would be a lovely time before we wrap up to perhaps ask you if you have thoughts, reactions. Amit, maybe we could would you like just to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Amit. I'm a founder and editor-in-chief of STIR. Interesting conversation. It was good to hear all three of you. Just a few days back, we had a conversation with Eric Chen at our studio talking about the role of cultural commentary in emerging economies like ours, which leads to the question, and what, after listening to you, we have museums and institutions and foundations like yours who play a critical role in establishing cultural commentary in society and in the places where we live in. Now, cultural commentary is getting adapted rapidly and getting changed rapidly given the fact that human behavior patterns are changing, technological intervention, like you talked about, digital world, climate intervention, socio-political intervention. Now, all that can affect and inform the programming of foundations or cultural institutions like yours. But my question to Stephanie, especially to you, when you have a museum coming up which has been built by an architect for the last so many years, how does the architecture and design adapts to the ever-changing cultural commentary? Because, and what key factors you keep that in mind when as a director of the museum, when the space is being built, the interiors and architecture of the space getting adapted to cultural commentary, and how does that get adapted?
Thank you, Amit.
I guess we all who do shows would wish that buildings can suddenly change, right? So you can kind of, so I would wish, there's still everything. When you started to build a building, we all know then you're on the journey and you can't really change. But what I think you can do is with how you ask your collaborators to engage with it. I mean, and I think this is how you have to, do that, what you say, you adapt to the time. I mean, a much more specific question, of course, I think is the one when you build a new building, how can you integrate in every stage the newest technology to, you know, make sure when you open, you've done what you can do to be as sustainable as you want to be at that time. And that is, of course, I mean, that's, if you're architects here, I think that's a challenging question. But I think there is a lot of ways which I feel, as you know, being engaged in museums, where it's not just about the museum, it's really how sustainable you work as a team. Because I think that's, for me, really a key question, which leads into what is an archive, how do you share knowledge, how, and again, I think this is a lot of things I think we haven't done well enough. I mean, we all, in all these amazing institutions, we do so many research, but then how can you make sure this is accessible for people who, you know, not doing the same thing? So this is, I think we're in times where that will be really accelerate, and will also help us, I think, to adapt. Because if you become an open source of knowledge, you know, the people who can access that knowledge, they can also then use it in the way where we feel it is, you know, it is timely. So I do think that changing from thinking you're the holder, or you kind of know as a public institution how you should look at something, much more like you have to be the platform for a creative, you know, outcomes to be accessible and be read in the way you want it. And especially, I mean, what we were talking about, the fact that there's so many different perspectives that I don't think you can really, or you should represent in our times one, but really try to be that open gateway into many different ones.
Thank you. Durjoy, anything to add to that? Or?
Just to talking about the space, because I think that space are built because any collections are evolving. I don't think there is any architect who could really adapt a design which is completely future-proof. So it is an adaptability. Just giving us a small example, we worked with artist based in Delhi, Mithu Sen. So her work was donated by DBF to a German museum. And the first thing that I asked the museum designer, that do you have a space to keep this work? And what if, when the museum will go for renovation? So at that time, the curator, her name is Uta, told me that, Durjoy, do not worry about the space. You just think about that if this work is coming to us, you are giving it to us or not. We will adapt with our need. Do not think that we are a small museum or the space is limited. All these are run out. So first commit the work, then we will decide where to put it. So I think that any space or any architect do their work, and then it's an evolving situation that has to be adapted when the time comes. So that is just a short addition.
I'm looking to my boss for the evening, who is Ranjana Steinrucker, just how we're doing on time and whether we should be looking to wrap up, or are we... Okay. So if there are any more questions, then please raise your hand. Otherwise, perhaps we might slowly think about wrapping up.
I'm very inspired by your question. I really like this idea, do you know, to also think about, and what you said was don't feel limited through space, that, you know, who knows, when we're getting more and more flexible, it always starts in the head, no, to think, does an institution and a public institution always need a huge building? You know, maybe we'll get to times where we can share, you know, there is something I feel, you know, it's even when we think about what is a book nowadays, like what is a museum and how can you open things up? I think we'll have to get rid of this is what a public institution is. Of course, you don't want to ship the works through the world, but I think there's something also about just thinking, how can things be more shared and maybe really exist in different realms? And maybe there be at some point in architecture which kind of comes up and disappears, and this is more flexible. I mean, I dream of a museum where you have in the summer when it's hotter, you have like more places, so people have also maybe, the shade. But then in the summer when it's possible, just open it up and be more exposed to the elements. I mean, there is a lot, I think, happening in people who deal with space, which could really allow a different engagement with that.
And often it's artists who can imagine these things. For those of us in Bombay, Sudarshan Shetty, one of our great artists, created a great installation in the early 2000s of a maquette of a museum of the future, which could expand and contract depending on the day of the week. And it was kind of this little wonderful motorized object. So I think often it takes non-architects to imagine how we can actually create buildings for the future. I think, did I see one hand? Yes, sir. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Bernhard Steinröcker. I'm the spouse. And my question is basically, with the Guggenheim at Abu Dhabi, we can imagine money doesn't matter. There is money endless, right? But how did you manage with your foundation? Because I think it could be a role model for many people that it's possible to have a foundation, to collect art, to have scholarships, and without having tons of money. So how does that work?
But also we will let Stephanie answer that as well.
Well, this is, as Mort earlier said about the gallery scene in Dhaka. In fact, the art scene and the art development in Bangladesh is very challenging. In fact, even the country like India, there are a lot of benefits and there are a lot of CSR available. And especially in Europe, when I go and I see that when the 3 works when I donated, they have an evaluation company and they send me a tax receipt. And I said, what is this for? They said that you can claim your tax back. And I said, well, I don't pay tax in your country, so I cannot pay the tax back. So there are a lot of advantage in those countries, especially even in India, but it doesn't exist in Bangladesh. So there are challenges. But I feel that when going gets tough, tough gets going. That's why DBF, organization like DBF comes into the play, that we try to take the challenges into consideration. We try to defer our priorities. We try to take the priorities which is very much needed. And not only that, we also into the process of acquiring artwork from South Asia. So there we are also investing a lot of our fund because we feel that we only have platform, we support and we do seminars, symposium. What is 20 or 25 years from now? How do we be identified? Only a platform, but we should have our own collection building things. So we support a lot of artists. We buy a lot of works from different galleries, auction houses, and art dealers. So that is how we continue our operation. Not only that, this year we have changed our logo of the organization. We took a artist's work, which is in our collection, a modern master from Bangladesh. We changed our logo so that we could be a future-proof. It is a tiles, like a fallen tiles kind of logo that we have. And a lot of people asked us that, what is this logo for? We said that, art world looks like very structured, very pretty, but there is a very fine crack or broken space. So we try to change our logo to that similarity so that we could work and fill those vacuum within our limited capacity. And let's see how the time progresses.
Thank you. Stephanie, I think it would be good if you also just respond. I'm sure money is not limitless, so I'm sure that there are concerns that you need to deal with on an operational level day to day. Is there anything you'd like to say to us?
I think like everywhere, everywhere where something is I think structured in a good way, there is a defined budget, and that's limited and not endless. And I think it's important for us, and therefore thank you for giving me to say that it is not the endless money there. It is a very clear budget for an institution, and of course we work with that. And I'm also someone who appreciates that a lot, because I do feel what you're saying, to have if one would have an endless resource, I don't think the outcome would be good. I think what we can, and what the art world is showing, that very often the institutions who are leading are the ones who don't have many means, also don't have many expenses, but have, can create within that. And I think that limitation also allows us, in a way, we all know from private, having no money is actually very freeing, because you're not afraid of losing it, and you're not afraid of, you don't have to think of how to spend it. So there's, of course, on that very privileged level, I mean, and I think the institution we're doing now has, and I can say that loudly, hopefully is set up in a way that we at least are able to pay artists appropriately. We also know that public institutions are very often based on the fact that artists have to do things without being remunerated appropriately, because there's never enough money, which is the truth. And so I hope that we can set up an institution where there is a fair, the value between the work people put in and what it is brought on a level. But of course, it's not limitless.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, as I go away and dream of being a penniless but very happy student again, because those are definitely my favorite years, I'd like to thank everyone so much for coming, and of course to our wonderful speakers, Stephanie and Durjoy. We really appreciate you coming to Mumbai for Mumbai Gallery Weekend. It means a lot to us. On behalf of the galleries, I'd like to thank you both. And I'd like to ask that everyone makes the most of the next few days. I think I'd just like to hand over to my colleague, Henna, no, I'm not going to hand over to my colleague, Henna. I'm sorry for stealing your thunder. And so with that, then I'd like to say thank you and good night, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.